Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 13 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. This is the last of a series of 4 verses in which Bhagavan is talking about knowledge and ignorance. In the first 3 verses, he was talking about, or at least to some extent, he was distinguishing knowledge and ignorance of things other than ourselves from the real knowledge or awareness, which is the pure awareness I am, which is our real nature. So when he talked about ignorance in the previous 3 verses, the ignorance he was referring to was ignorance of things other than ourselves. In this verse also he talks about ignorance, but here the ignorance he's talking about is, well, what he means by ignorance is the false awareness. So what he says in the false awareness means false awareness of ourselves, not knowing ourselves as we actually are, knowing ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So what he says in this, in the first sentence of this verse is, ñāṇamām tāṉēmey. Ñāṇam means knowledge, or in this context, it means awareness. This is referring to the pure awareness that we actually are. ñāṇamām means which is, or who is. Tāṉē means oneself alone, and may means real. So this sentence means oneself, who is awareness, alone is real. And as I say, the awareness he's referring to here is the pure awareness, the awareness but is not aware of anything other than itself. Then in the next sentence he says, nāṇāvā ñāṇam aññāṇamām. Knowledge or awareness that is manifold is ignorance. That is, we alone are what is real. So awareness of ourself alone is real awareness. Awareness of other things is not real awareness, because nothing other than ourself is real. All other things are a mere appearance. So being aware of what is not real, what doesn't, real here means what actually exists. Unreal means what doesn't actually exist, even if it seems to exist. So when we're aware of anything other than ourselves, we're aware of things that are not real, but things that do not actually exist. So that is not real awareness, that is ignorance. What this sentence means is, nāṇā means many or manifold or diverse. Again means which is. ñāṇam means awareness. So it literally means awareness which is many. However, what he means by knowledge which is many is knowledge of multiplicity, knowledge of many things. That is, when we're aware of many things, our awareness is seemingly divided as many things. That is, we have awareness of A and of B and of C and of D, of multiplicity. There is actually an earlier version of this verse. That is, Bhagavan wrote this verse on the 30th of July, 1928, while he was composing Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. And he first composed this verse in a different form, and then he modified it. So that what he said in the older version of this verse, which is verse 12 in Upadesha Tanipakal, a collection of miscellaneous verses of Upadesha, what he said was, in the first sentence, ñāṇam aññāṛi unmei. That means awareness alone is real. That's why he modified this later to say oneself who is awareness alone is real. And then in the next sentence, he began saying, nāṇāvā kāṇkindra ñāṇam. That is the awareness that sees as many. So what he means in this verse 13 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when he says ñāṇamām ñāṇam, is the ñāṇa but sees the one thing that actually exists, namely ourself, as many things. So seeing the one as many, that is ignorance. The rest of the verse, it's slightly different than the original form, but Bhagavan has packed more into this version. That's why he rewrote it. But it's that earlier version gives us a clearer insight into what he means by nāṇāvā ñāṇam. It means the awareness that sees as many. The implication is the awareness that sees the one thing that is real, namely oneself, as many things. Because though we see the seeming existence of many things, those many things have no existence independent of ourself. It is ourself we are seeing as all these things. Just like when we're dreaming, the dreaming mind is seeing itself as the dream world, consisting of so many different objects or phenomena and events and so on. And nāṇāvā ñāṇam aññāṇamām, basically it means awareness of multiplicity is ignorance. So knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance, is what Bhagavan is saying here. This is a very, very important idea. But then he goes on to, he goes a bit deeper into this. What he says in the next sentence is, poyyāmañ aññāணamey, ñāṉamām taṉṉai aññāṉri iṉṭṛu. What that means is, even ignorance, that means ignorance that is the awareness of multiplicity, even ignorance, which is unreal, poy means unreal, is the opposite of may, which means real, poyyāmañ, which means, so ignorance which is real, even ignorance which is real does not exist, iṉṭṛu means does not exist, aññāṛi, except, or other than, or independent of, besides oneself, who is ñāṇa. So the one thing that actually exists is only ourself. The awareness of multiplicity has no existence independent of that one thing that actually exists, namely ourself, who are ñāṇa. And then to illustrate this, he gives an analogy. What he says in the next sentence is, añigaḻ ḍāmpalavum poy. That means all the many ornaments are unreal. Poymeyyām poṉṉai aṇḍṛi uṇḍō. Do they exist except as gold, which is real? Or do they exist besides gold, which is real? That is, in this analogy, gold is the substance. The ornaments are just forms. Those forms have no existence independent of the substance. If you've got a number of gold ornaments, supposing you've got rings and bangles and necklaces and gold anklets and tiaras and crowns and so many different gold ornaments you have, if you take away the gold, those ornaments don't exist. The ornaments borrow their seeming existence from the substance, which is gold. So forms borrow their seeming existence from the substance. You can't have a form without a substance. So according to Bhagavan, the forms are unreal. That's why he says all the many ornaments are unreal. Do they exist except as gold, which is real? Obviously, gold is not real in the absolute sense, but for the purpose of this analogy, it's gold that actually exists. The forms have though the forms seem to exist, they have no existence independent of the gold. In the same way, what actually exists is only ourself, who are pure awareness. The awareness of many things is like the different ornaments. It's like they're different forms, but the underlying substance is gold. There are two analogies often used in Advaitic texts. One is this gold and ornament analogy. Another parallel analogy is mud and pots. And according to Advaita, what is real is only the substance. So in the case of the mud pot, like as in the case of the gold ornament, what is real is the mud, the clay of which the pots are made. The pots are just a form. Before the pot was formed, it was clay. When it is formed, it is still clay. If a pot is broken, it is still clay. The substance remains the same. The form is just a temporary appearance. In a sense, this gold ornament analogy is, though the mud pot analogy is more frequently used, there's a problem with the mud pot. But if you take clay, form it into a pot, and to actually retain its form as a pot, you then have to bake it. Once it's baked, the clay is no longer, the clay changes its substance. But so this gold analogy is in a way more apt, because the gold never changes. When you make an ornament, the gold remains the same. It's not going under. The only change is a change in form, a change in appearance. The substance remains the same. But to understand either of these analogies, that is, no analogy can perfectly illustrate what is intended to be illustrated. So there are a number of other analogies used in Advaita philosophy. Probably the most well-known one is the snake rope analogy. So we have to understand this gold ornament analogy, or the mud and pot analogy, in terms of the snake rope analogy. In the case of the rope that seems to be a snake, what actually exists is only a rope, just as what actually exists is only the gold or only the mud. The snake is a mere appearance. Even when it seems to be a snake, there's actually no snake there at all. So this analogy is important to illustrate that this analogy, the snake rope analogy, illustrates why Bhagavan says here the many ornaments are unreal. Because their ornaments are like the snake. They're a mere appearance. They don't actually exist. Because these analogies are used in Advaita. The fundamental principle of Advaita is, in the Upanishads, it's expressed as ekam eva advaitiyam, one only without a second. That is, Brahman, or our own real nature, is one only without a second. That is the meaning of Advaita. Advaita means non-two-ness. There's no second thing. So one only without a second. If the truth is that there's one only without a second, then that seems to contradict our experience. Because in our experience, there are so many things. There are so many objects of this world. There are so many thoughts and feelings and emotions and so on in our mind. This world is full of multiplicity. So how can it be said that there's only one thing without a second, when our experience tells us there are so many things? So when our experience tells us there are many things, how is Advaita justified in saying there's only one thing without a second? The answer given by Advaita is multiplicity is just an appearance. All the many things do not actually exist. Just like a rope that seems to be a snake, what actually exists is only the rope. There's no snake there at all. The snake is a mere appearance. Likewise, all the many objects, the many phenomena that make up our experience, our awareness of multiplicity, in other words, is just an appearance. It is not real. That is why Bhagavan says it is ignorance, and that ignorance is unreal. So we have to, in this verse, we have to pay close attention to every word Bhagavan uses, because this is a very, very important principle Bhagavan is teaching us in this verse. Multiplicity is unreal. Because multiplicity is unreal, awareness of multiplicity is ignorance. It's not real awareness. So this is why Bhagavan, just like the snake is unreal, what is real is the rope. In this snake rope analogy, Bhagavan is clarifying when this analogy is used, we need to understand that the ornaments are as unreal as the snake. They're a mere appearance. What actually exists there is only the gold. Gold is the substance. So the ornaments borrow their semi-existence from the gold. In other words, the forms borrow their semi-existence from the underlying substance. The snake borrows its semi-existence from the rope. What actually exists is a rope. So the snake borrows its semi-existence from the snake. The mud pots borrow their semi-existence from the clay of which they're made. Without the clay, there's no such thing as a clay pot. So this is very, very important to understand. People who are opposed to Advaita try to twist these analogies. So there's a book called Satdarsham Bhashya. Satdarsham Bhashya, I'll just tell a little bit of history behind this book, because just to put it in context. That is, Bhagavan wrote Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu in Tamil. Shortly after he had composed Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, a devotee who had only recently come to Bhagavan was a person called Lakshman Sharma. He's best known among English-speaking devotees as Who, the author of Mahayoga. He also wrote in Tamil a Tamil commentary on Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, but that was much later. So when he first came to Bhagavan, that was at about the time Bhagavan had written Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So one day Bhagavan asked him, "Have you read Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu?" Lakshman Sharma was a Tamilian, but in those days, under the British rule, the education policy was that in schools, the first language that should be taught is English. And then each child could choose either to study one other language. Either they could study Sanskrit or they could study their mother tongue. So in Tamil Nadu, that meant they had a choice either of studying Tamil or studying Sanskrit. As a general rule, most Brahmins tended to opt to study Sanskrit, whereas most non-Brahmins opted to study Tamil. This is one of the ways in which the British policy, the means by which they ruled a few thousand British people, managed to rule over such a vast country of such a huge population, was by divide and rule. They kept on trying to divide the population so that each is opposed to the other, and therefore they can rule over them. So this was part of their divide and rule policy. Prior to this education policy, which was brought in by the British in the early part of the 19th century, any educated Tamilian would study both Sanskrit and Tamil. So they'd be well-versed in Tamil and also well-versed in Sanskrit. But after this policy was introduced, those who knew Sanskrit well generally didn't know Tamil well. And those who knew Tamil well generally didn't know Sanskrit well. And this also created that heightened the division between castes, because most Brahmins would opt to study Sanskrit and most non-Brahmins would opt to study Tamil. There were exceptions, of course. For example, Muruganar, though he was a Brahmin, he had so much love for Tamil, he opted to study he opted to study Tamil, and he became a great Tamil scholar and poet. He also knew Sanskrit, but that wasn't his main subject. His main subject was Tamil. So Lakshman Sharma was one of the many Tamil Brahmins who at school had opted to study Sanskrit and therefore didn't have a deep knowledge. Of course, he spoke Tamil, but the literary Tamil is quite different to spoken Tamil. So he wasn't so familiar with literary Tamil. So for him to understand Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu was very difficult, although it's written in Tamil, his mother tongue, because it's written in a very literary style of Tamil. He couldn't easily understand it. So when Bhagavan asked him, "Have you studied Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu?" he said, "No, I'm a Sanskrit student, so I'm not. It's difficult for me to understand the Tamil." But then he thought to himself, but when Bhagavan asked me this question, this is a very good opportunity. So then he said, but I would like to study Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu if Bhagavan would be kind enough to teach me. So Bhagavan began to explain to him the meaning of the verses. And because Lakshman Sharma had a love for Sanskrit, and because he was a moderately competent poet in Sanskrit, he wanted to when Bhagavan explained to him the meaning of each verse, he wanted to write it in Tamil verse form. But first he asked Bhagavan, he said to Bhagavan, Bhagavan, why don't you translate this into Sanskrit? And since Bhagavan had told him a story about this, how Kavyaganta was unable to compose, in Tamil, there's a particular meter. The meter in which Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu is written is called Vemba. This is a very, among Tamil poets, if a poet cannot compose Vembas, they're not considered a poet at all. The basic qualification of a poet is the ability to compose a Vemba. It's actually quite a difficult meter for those who are unfamiliar with it. Those who are familiar with it, I mean, for those who are natural poets, it comes second nature to compose Vembas. So once, many years earlier, Kavyaganta, Ganpati Sastri, had, in the presence of Bhagavan, he was talking about the greatness of Sanskrit poetry. And he was saying there's no poetry in the world that compares with Sanskrit poetry. So in order to subdue his pride, Bhagavan said, in Tamil we have a meter called Vemba, which is a very basic, I mean, it's considered the basic, if any poet who is a real poet will be able to compose Vembas. So do you have any meter like this in Sanskrit? And Kavyaganta asked Bhagavan to explain this meter. And when he explained the rules, it's far more complex rules than the rules of most Sanskrit meters. So then Bhagavan said to him, why don't you compose a verse in Sanskrit in Vemba meter? And Kavyaganta tried, he wasn't able to do so. Every time he tried, it was coming out wrong, Bhagavan was pointing out. Then Bhagavan said, okay, if you're not able to compose in Sanskrit, why don't you try in Telugu, your mother tongue? And he tried in Telugu, he wasn't also able to compose any Vemba in Telugu. So this was a story Bhagavan often used to tell. So he had mentioned this to Lakshman Sharma. So Lakshman Sharma asked Bhagavan to translate Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu into Sanskrit in Vemba meter. And Bhagavan said, no, I'm not a Sanskrit student like you. You can do better than me. You compose. And then Lakshman Sharma said, if even Kavyaganta couldn't compose a Vemba in Sanskrit, how can I do so? And then Bhagavan explained to him the rules, and Lakshman Sharma tried, but he couldn't. Then Bhagavan translated the first verse, the Mangalam verse of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. He translated it into Sanskrit in a Vemba meter. That is the only the only Sanskrit verse in Vemba meter, as far as I'm aware. So Bhagavan just illustrated that it is possible to compose Sanskrit verses in this Tamil meter. And later, many years later, this was, I mean, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu was written in 1928. In about 1948 or so, once when Bhagavan told this story about how Kavyaganta wasn't able to compose, even in Telugu, and Sri Nagama asked Bhagavan, why don't you compose a Telugu verse in Vemba meter? And Bhagavan said, oh, that's not necessary. But somehow because she had prompted him, somehow it came to him to write one verse in Telugu. And then after writing one, he wrote another one. And in the end, he wrote 5 verses in Telugu. And he immediately translated them into Tamil. Both the Telugu verses and the Tamil verses were in Vemba meter. This is the work Ekamma Panchakam. So this is how Bhagavan came to compose that Ekamma Panchakam. Sorry, this is all a bit of a not directly relevant to what I'm saying, but there's I'm just putting it in context. So Bhagavan translated only one verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu into Sanskrit. Since that meter was too difficult for Lakshman Sharma, he tried in several other meters. So he composed, he made several attempts in different meters to translate Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu into Sanskrit. And every time he tried, he would submit it to Bhagavan. Bhagavan would correct his verses, but then he would feel he can do better. So he would try in some other meter. So this was going on for some time, several months this was going on. While this was going on, Kapali Sastri, who was a disciple of Kavyaganta had by this time left Tiruvannamalai, and he was living in a place called, if I remember correctly, Sirsi in Karnataka. He never returned after about he left in about 1928 or 29. After that, he never returned. And Kapali Sastri by that time had become a disciple of Aurobindo and the French mother in Pondicherry. So at one time when Kapali Sastri was going to visit Kavyaganta in Sirsi, he passed through Tiruvannamalai and intended to spend a few days there and then go on to Sirsi. While he was there, he was told by others, but this new person called Lakshman Sharma, he's written a Sanskrit translation of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So Kapali Sastri asked if he could see it, and he looked at it, and he saw it's moderately good Tamil Sanskrit poetry, but it's not such high standard. So he then said, could I take a copy of this and show this to Kavyaganta? So he took a copy. Bhagavan told Lakshman Sharma, so Lakshman Sharma made a copy of it and gave it to him, and he took it to Kavyaganta. A few weeks later, Kavyaganta sent a letter to Bhagavan along with a new translation of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. And the title that Bhagavan and Lakshman Sharma had given to Lakshman Sharma's translation was Satdarshana. So Kavyaganta took that title, Satdarshana, for his own translation and wrote a completely fresh translation. And he wrote to Bhagavan saying, perceiving the restrictions in my hands to correct the version of Lakshman Sharma, I decided to make my own translation, because though Kavyaganta could speak Tamil, he didn't know literary Tamil, but Vishwanatha Swami was there with him in Sirsi. So with the help of Vishwanatha Swami, and Kapali Sastri also knew some Tamil, so with their help, he made this translation. But and he sent this along with this letter, and he said in the letter, please ask the ashram manager not to print this until Kapali has finished his commentary. So when Lakshman Sharma saw the Sanskrit translation of Kavyaganta, it's written in very beautiful Sanskrit verses. So he said to Bhagavan, oh, this is very nice. This is much better than anything I could do. I will take this for my Parayana. And then Bhagavan at once objected and said, no, start to make a fresh translation in a longer meter. And he was a bit puzzled by that. Then Bhagavan pointed out how many important ideas in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu had either been omitted in Sanskrit in Kavyaganta's version, or they had been twisted and to give a different meaning. So, and Bhagavan told him they did this because they hated Dvaita like poison. And Bhagavan pointed out examples. One example was this verse. When Kavyaganta translated this verse, Bhagavan uses the word poi, unreal, twice in this verse. In the third sentence, he says the ignorance is unreal. And in the fourth sentence, he said the ornaments are unreal. In the Sanskrit verse, they completely omit this word unreal. There's no, that word unreal has not been translated. that gave room for Kapali Sastri to interpret this verse in a completely different way. In his introduction to Satdarshana, he discusses this pot clay analogy, and he says, in order to understand the full truth of the pot, you need to understand both the substance and the form. If you understand only the substance, that's only a partial knowledge. If you understand only the form, that's a partial knowledge. To have complete knowledge, you need to know both the substance and the form. And that's what he argued using that analogy. And he says, likewise, in order to understand Brahman, you have to understand both the substance and the form. The form of Brahman is the world. The substance is Brahman. That was his argument. And he even goes so far as to say, I'm just reading, this is the book, the Satdarshan Bhashya. Here on page 6 in this edition, this is it's an old edition from 1975. On page 6 of this edition, he says, after explaining this, his interpretation of this snake, of this clay and pot analogy, he says, he concludes, it is evident then that it is both false and futile to affirm that the substantial truth alone of the world being, Brahman, is real, and that the formal aspect of Brahman as the world is unreal. So he's saying here that what Bhagavan has taught is false and futile. Because Bhagavan is asserting here, Bhagavan clearly implies when he says knowledge of multiplicity is ignorance and ignorance is unreal, the implication is, but multiplicity is unreal. Because as he says in the first sentence, oneself, who is jnana, alone is real. That means no other thing is real. So this is how those who are opposed to Advaita, they twist these analogies. This is why I said we need to understand these analogies together. We need to the clay and pot analogy, the golden ornament analogy, and the snake and rope analogy. We need to understand all these together. What is real is the underlying substance. In the case of the snake and rope, the rope is the reality, the snake is a mere appearance. Likewise with the ornaments, the gold is real, the forms, the ornaments are unreal. In the case of the clay and pot, the clay is real, the substance is real, the form, the pot, is unreal. But to make that absolutely clear, Bhagavan added these words, unreal. He said, ignorance is unreal, and the many ornaments are unreal. So the implication is, but multiplicity is unreal. Why? Because the truth is, ekam eva advaitiyam. There is one only without a second. And what is that one? Tattvamasi, you are that. So we ourselves are the one thing that is real. That's why he says here, ñāṇamām tāṉēmey. He says a similar thing in other words in nāṇā. In the 7th paragraph of nāṇā, he says, yatātamai uḻḷadu atmasarupam. That means what actually exists is only Atmaswarupa. Atmaswarupa means the real nature of ourself. The real nature of ourself is what he refers to here as ñāṇamān tāṉē, oneself alone, who is awareness. So that alone is real. That alone is what actually exists. Multiplicity is unreal. That means it doesn't actually exist, even though it seems to exist. So this is it's very important to understand why Bhagavan says this, because sometimes people used to ask Bhagavan, why do you put so much emphasis on the fact that this world appearance is unreal? Bhagavan said, because so long as you take it to be real, your mind will always be after it. If you're seeking the reality and the reality alone, you have no option but to accept. But all this appearance is unreal. What is real is only one, and you are that. That is what Advaita is all about. So understanding this verse clearly is very, very important. when he says, I'm going to go back to dealing with the verse now. In the first sentence, when he says oneself who is awareness, what he means by oneself is our real nature. What we actually are is just pure awareness. And in the Kali Vemba version of this verse, he added one word here that is before the first word of the verse, which is ñāṇam. He said, he added a relative clause or adjectival clause, seribaya. That means seribu means what is dense or abundant or full or firm. In this context, it implies clear, and aya means which is. So that oneself, who is awareness, jnana, which is very dense, abundant, clear, full, or firm. So what we actually are is that clear awareness of our own existence. I am. The one thing that is clearer than any other thing is our own existence, as Murugan points out in the Anupalavi, the post-refrain of Anmavide. What Murugan says there, that is the implication is that oneself is so very real, even to the most ignorant person, but in comparison, even the amalaka fruit on the palm is less certain. That is, if you want to say that something is very clear and very certain, the analogy that is often used in Indian languages is an amalaka fruit on the palm. In Tamil, it's said ulankai nelikani. Ulankai means the palm, nelikani means an amalaka fruit. So if you've got an amalaka fruit is, you may be familiar with the word amla. Amla, it occurs in many medicines. It's a small fruit about the size of a grape with a stone in it. It's very high in vitamin C, and it's got various medicinal properties. So if you've got an amla on your fruit on your palm, you can't doubt its existence. It's so clear. But according to Murugan, even that is open to doubt, because the amla fruit in my palm, if I'm dreaming, then my palm and the amla fruit are all part of a dream. So if all this is a dream, even that is unreal. But the one thing that is indubitably real, the one thing that we know more clearly than any other thing, is our own existence. I am. So that's why Murugan says oneself, Atma, is the one thing that is absolutely certain. And Murugan said that in the Anupalavi, the post-refrain, in the first verse of Anmavide, Bhagavan then takes up that, and he begins from that point, saying that though oneself alone is real, the world and the body and world sprout as if real. So all the multiplicity, though it seems to be real, it is not actually real. What is real is only this fundamental awareness, I am. In other words, ourselves. We alone are what is real. That is what Bhagavan is emphasizing here. Since we alone are what is real, and as I said, may, real, here means what actually exists. We alone are what actually exists. So but since we alone actually exist, being aware of many other things is not real knowledge. It's only ignorance, because Bhagavan said it in an earlier verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. In verse 11, he said, Arivurum taṉṇai ariyadu, ayale arivadu ariyāmey, aññāṛi arivo. That means not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance. So knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance. If we know ourselves, then there'll be nothing else to know. Why is that? Because what knows sorry, I'll just finish translating. Then he says, aññāṛi arivo, besides is it knowledge. The implication is knowing anything other than ourselves is only ignorance. It is not knowledge. It's an emphatic way of saying it. And then he says, when one knows oneself, the support for knowledge and ignorance will cease. Why is that? We know other things only so long as we rise as ego. When we don't rise as ego, as in sleep, we're not aware of anything other than ourselves. When we rise as ego, we take ourselves to be a form, and consequently we are aware of a multiplicity of other forms. When we don't rise as ego, we remain as that pure awareness, ñāṇamān tāṉ, oneself who is ñāṇa. As ñāṇa, the pure awareness, we don't know anything other than ourselves. Pure awareness is called pure awareness, Suddha Chaitanya, because it's awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. In other words, it's awareness devoid of content, devoid of objects. It is just pure awareness. What knows other things is not ourself as we actually are, but only ourself as ego. So since ego is unreal, all that it knows is unreal. So knowing multiplicity is not knowledge, it is only ignorance. That is what Bhagavan is saying, both in verse 11 and in verse 13. But if this knowledge of multiplicity is only ignorance, is this ignorance real or unreal? Ignorance is unreal, but though it's unreal, it doesn't exist independent of the real awareness. That is, we couldn't be aware of multiplicity if we were not aware. We must be aware in order to be aware of many things. So the pure awareness is the mere awareness. The awareness of anything, that is ignorance. So we need to distinguish. Bhagavan used two terms in Tamil to distinguish the awareness, the pure awareness from the awareness of other things. The pure awareness, awareness of other things, he used to call suttarivu. Suttu means what is showing or pointing. So the showing or pointing awareness, that implies the awareness that is aware of things other than itself. In other words, the awareness that shows up all this, that displays this multiplicity. In English, I usually express that as transitive awareness. Transitive means it has objects. It's awareness that is with objects. Like a transitive verb is a verb that takes an object. An intransitive verb is a verb that doesn't take an object. In cricket, for example, in cricket, you hit a ball. The verb to hit has to have an object. You can't hit without hitting something. So the verb hit is a transitive verb because it takes an object. Having hit the ball, then the person who hits the ball with the bat has to run to the other wicket. So running is an intransitive verb because you can't run something. There's no object of running. You just run. You can't say, oh, what did he run? That makes no sense because it's an intransitive. You can ask, what did he hit? He hit a ball. What did he run? Makes no sense at all because that's an intransitive verb. So using these terms, transitive and intransitive, and applying them to awareness, transitive awareness is awareness of things. In other words, what Bhagavan refers to here is nāṇāvā, awareness of multiplicity, because in awareness of multiplicity, there's a subject, namely ego, and objects, namely all the things that it's aware of. That is transitive awareness, or what Bhagavan calls suttarivu. He also used the term suttatrarivu. That means awareness that is devoid of pointing. That means intransitive awareness, awareness for which there is no object. So in order to be aware of anything, you have to be aware. But in order to be aware, you don't have to be aware of anything. In waking and dream, we're aware of so many things. In sleep, we're not aware of anything, but we're still aware. Because if we weren't aware in sleep, we wouldn't know that we were ever in a state in which we're not aware of anything. Awareness of things is transitive awareness. The pure awareness is awareness that is just awareness. It's not awareness of anything. So when Bhagavan says ñāṇamām tāṉēmey, what he means by ñāṇa there is the pure awareness, the sutatra arivu, the awareness that is not aware of anything, but is just pure awareness. That is what is real, because the awareness of things comes and goes. When we rise as ego, we're aware of other things. In waking and dream, we're aware of other things. In sleep, we're not aware of any other thing. But in all three states, we are aware. So the real awareness is not awareness of anything, but the pure awareness of, well, it's not, we can't even, the awareness I am, that's the simplest way to put it. That is, the pure awareness is not aware of anything other than itself. And itself obviously isn't an object of awareness. So what Bhagavan is saying in these verses, 10, 11, 12, and 13, these are very, very deep ideas, but also very important ideas. Ideas with great practical implication, because so long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves, we who are aware of that are ego. So in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to cease rising as ego. That means we need to cease being aware of other things. This is why, for example, in the third paragraph of nāṇā, Bhagavan says, unless the perception of the world ceases, the swarupa darshana, the seeing of oneself, in other words, self-knowledge, will not arise. Why? Because so long as we're aware of other things, so long as we're aware of the appearance of the world, for example, we who are aware of that are ego. And ego is always aware of itself as I am this body. That is ignorance. So that which it knows anything other than itself is ignorance. That which knows itself alone, that alone is the real knowledge. So in order to know ourselves as we actually are, we need to be, we need to cease being aware of any other thing. In other words, we need to attend to ourselves so keenly, but we withdraw our attention from all other things and are aware of ourself alone. As soon as we're aware of ourself alone, we are aware of ourselves as we actually are. Ego is thereby destroyed, because ego is a false awareness of ourself as I am this body. So if we think deeply about these verses and understand the practical implication of them, they are very, very important. What Bhagavan is teaching us here, it may sound like rather abstract philosophy, saying that awareness of multiplicity is ignorance, and that ignorance is unreal, but that ignorance doesn't exist apart from oneself who is real. That may, on the surface, it may seem like rather abstract philosophy, but if we think about it and try to understand why Bhagavan is emphasizing this, what is the practical implication of this, then it becomes very clear. But what Bhagavan is teaching us is all Bhagavan's teachings, the hallmark of Bhagavan's teachings is they're practical. All his teachings have practical implication, and we cannot be said to have understood his teachings correctly until we understand the practical implications. So now we have risen as ego, and we are consequently aware of other things. So this awareness of other things is ignorance, and this ignorance is unreal. But does this ignorance exist independent of ourselves? No. Without the basic awareness, without being aware, you couldn't be aware of anything. As I said, we can be aware without being aware of anything, but we cannot be aware of anything without being aware. So being aware is our real nature. Being aware means just being aware, not being aware of anything. The awareness of things is a superimposition, just like the snake is superimposed on, the appearance of a snake is superimposed on a rope, or the appearance of a ring is superimposed on gold, or the appearance of a pot is superimposed on clay. What is real is the underlying substance, not the outward form, not what is superimposed upon it, because what is superimposed is not real. The form of the pot is not real. The clay wasn't a pot before it was made into a pot. It ceases to be a pot after it's broken, but it remains clay all along. Likewise with ornaments. The gold is gold, whether it's made into a ring or a bangle or a bracelet or something. Of course, gold cannot remain without having some form. That's why the snake rope analogy is also important to consider, because the rope is a rope. Whether it appears as a snake or not, it is always a rope. It doesn't actually undergo any change. So all knowledge of multiplicity is a mere superimposition, an adhyasa. It is something that is superimposed upon the underlying reality. The underlying reality is the vastu or poral, that is the substance. Illustrated by the gold or the rope or the clay. Everything else is just a superimposition. And in whose view does the rope appear to be a snake? Only in the view of ego. In whose view is the gold seen as a ring or a bangle or a tiara or a necklace or whatever? It's only in the view of ego. So the defect lies not in what is seen, but in the seer. It is we who are seeing things wrongly. What actually exists is only ourself. If we see ourself alone, that is true knowledge. That is pure awareness. If we see anything other than ourself, what are we seeing as that? We are seeing ourselves as those other things. That is ignorance. So this is the message of this verse. We understand it clearly. It's extremely important principle to understand Advaita properly, and it's also is extremely significant from a practical point of view, because what is it we are trying to attend to? What is it we are trying to investigate? When we are practicing Atma-vichara, we're trying to investigate ourself alone. In other words, our attention needs to be on ourself alone, not on anything other than ourselves, not on any object. And the deeper we go in this practice, in other words, the more we focus our attention on ourselves, the more other things we draw into the background. And when we turn the full 180 degrees, so to speak, away from other things, back towards ourselves, we cease to be aware of anything else, and we're aware of ourself alone. That is the state of pure awareness. That is the annihilation of ego. The false awareness, I am this body. Sorry, that was rather a long explanation, but it's. I hope what I've said is useful. So if anyone has any questions about this, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. So, I have a question here. Is it possible to be aware of other things transact in the world while our focus is on our fundamental awareness?
You're talking about the practice, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Because in the state of attainment, there is no world. So it's only during the state of practice that this question can arise. Yes, because when you see a ring, you can either be admiring, oh, it's such a beautiful workmanship here, so elaborate, or a necklace, for example. It may be very, very fine goldsmithship. They may have very fine, intricate patterns they may have done. It may be a very fine work. If your attention is on the form, on the beauty of the form, you're overlooking the underlying substance. But you can look at the same thing and just see the substance. You can ignore the form and just recognize, oh, this is gold. So likewise in our experience, whether our attention is on other things or not, the one thing we are always aware of is ourself. So we have a choice. Do we attend to the other things or do we attend to ourselves? If we attend to ourselves, everything else will will happen as it's meant to happen, because everything else is happening in accordance with with prarabdha. So it is what has been already preordained. So things will happen in that is, whatever work this body or mind are destined to do, they will be made to do by God. So that we need not be concerned about. So it's a matter of what we're interested in. If we're very interested in our work, in the outcome of our work and everything, our attention will be on that. If we're very interested in knowing who am I, our attention will be going inwards, and the outward life will be going on as it is meant to. Bhagavan makes this very clear, for example, in the 13th paragraph of nāṇā. He begins this paragraph by defining what is self-surrender. He says, Anma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalambavadaku, satram idum kodamal, apmanishta paranai iripade, taṉṇai isanuku alipadam. What that means is being as apmanishta paran. Apmanishta paran means one who is firmly fixed as oneself. How to be firmly fixed as ourselves is what he implies in the earlier part of the sentence. Anma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalamavadku satram idum kodamo. That means giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought except atmachintana. Atmachintana literally means thought of oneself, but it implies self-attentiveness. In other words, being so keenly self-attentive, but we thereby give no room to the rising of any other thought. How do we not give room to the rising of any other thought? By being self-attentive? Because no thought can rise without our awareness of it. So if we do not attend to any thought, it cannot rise. So the implication is we need to be so keenly self-attentive, but we cease to be aware of anything else. That is being atmanishta paran, and that is taṉṇai isanuku alipadam. That alone is giving oneself to God. So, in other words, if we want to surrender ourselves wholly to God, we need to attend to ourselves so keenly, but we give no room to the rising of any other thought. So at this point, anyone can object, but I've got so many responsibilities. I've got a wife or husband, I've got elderly parents, I've got children, I've got a job, I've got responsibilities, I've got this or that. How can I go through life without thinking of anything? According to Bhagavan, we don't have to think of anything because everything is being taken care of by God. So in the next sentence, he says, even though Isam peril evelo bharate patalum avalavayum ava bahitu kolkira. That means even though one places whatever amount of burden or however much burden upon God, that entire amount he will bear. The implication in this context is even the burden of thinking for us, we can leave that burden to God. He will take care of everything. So if he wants us to earn to support our wife or our husband and our children, our parents and others, he will make our mind, speech, and body do whatever actions are necessary. So the thought, word, and deed, if we hand over the three instruments of action, namely mind, speech, and body, if we hand them over to God by clinging to self-attentiveness, he will use those instruments to do whatever needs to be done. So then in the next sentence, he says, Sakala karyangalayum oru parameshwara shakti nadati kol kiripadiyal namum adaku adangiya ramal ippadi vendum appadi vendum iṉṭṟu sada chintipadu ain. What that means is, since one Parameshwara Shakti means parama means supreme, or Ishvara means God, or it also means ruling, because God is the ruler of the universe, so he's called Ishvara. So the Parameshwara Shakti can mean the supreme ruling power, or the power of God. It amounts to the same. We can interpret it either way. Since that one Parameshwara Shakti is driving all karyas. Karyas means whatever needs or ought to be done or to happen. So everything that needs to happen, everything that ought to happen, he is making them happen. Everything that our mind, speech, or body need to do or ought to do, he makes them do. So when such is the case, instead of we also yielding to it, why to be perpetually thinking it is necessary to do like this, it is necessary to do like that? That is, Bhagavan is giving us an assurance here. If we focus all our interest, all our effort, all our attention on attending to ourselves, he will take care of, that is surrendering ourselves to him. Having surrendered to him, he will take care of everything else. Even if we don't surrender to him, he's still taking care of everything. He's still driving all karyas. All our efforts to do things, thinking that we are doing by our strength, is just ignorant. Everything is being done by him. It's because of our ignorance that we think, I need to work, I must do. That, who is it? What are the instruments of action? It is mind, speech, and body. Let the mind, speech, and body do whatever God wants them to do. He will make them do. The mistake we make is we identify ourselves with this mind, speech, and body. So we say, I am thinking, I am speaking, I am doing, I am working, I am earning money, I am rich because I've worked hard for it. All this is because of a false identification of ourselves with the five sheaths, the body, prana, the life, mind, intellect, and will. Because we identify ourselves with these things, we say, I am doing, I am talking, I am thinking. That is because of our wrong identification. The aim of surrender, the aim of vichara, is to give up this wrong identification by holding on to our own being, holding on to what we actually are, which is just I am. We are thereby separated from these things. These instruments of action will go on doing whatever they're destined to do. God will take care of that. So we need not be concerned about anything. Our sole duty is to attend to ourselves. And then Bhagavan concludes this paragraph by a very beautiful analogy, the analogy of a passenger traveling on the train. What he says is, though we know that the train is bearing all the burdens, why should we who go traveling in it, instead of remaining happily, leaving our small luggage placed on it, placed on the train, suffer bearing that luggage on our head? So if you're traveling on a train, whether you carry your luggage on your head or you put it on the luggage rack, the train is going to carry it to its destination. If you put it on the luggage rack, you can travel comfortably and happily without any botheration. If you insist on carrying your luggage on your head, you're going to suffer. Likewise, thinking that we need to do anything is carrying our burden on our head. Everything is being taken care of by God. The train is carrying all the burden. So we can happily leave the whole burden to him. Our only duty is to be so keenly self-attentive that we do not give even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than ourselves. Does that adequately answer that question?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So I just wanted to share something that I've been doing in my practice, see if I'm kind of tracking what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So in my work, I talk with a lot of people, and what I've been practicing is one-on-one. And so what I've been practicing is when I will I'll notice that I'm attending very keenly to their words, and there's a sort of a, wanting to make something happen or looking for opportunities or whatever. And I will consciously then redirect attention to self, just to move it here internally. And then there will be a sort of just sort of a peace, and the words are just sort of washing over me. It'd be hard to say I'm even listening, but I'm just more, it's just they're just flowing. And it will be there will be sometimes responses from me from that place or whatever. The conversation doesn't stop, but then I'll notice there's a little fear. I would imagine ego is coming in to say, oh no, I'm not tracking. I'm not tracking what's going on, and so then the attention will go right back to the person.
Where's my luggage? My luggage may not be coming with me. Put it back on my head.
That's it. And so I just noticed that happens. In fact, I was even playing with it while you were talking. I would do the same thing. And so I think that in terms of my practice, I think it's just to keep practicing that movement. Yeah.
Bhagavan's teachings are incredibly practical. Yes. It's all about practice. And if we trust what Bhagavan says, if we are firmly convinced, but everything else is happening as it's meant to happen. As Bhagavan said in a note he wrote to his mother, what is not to happen what is never to happen will not happen, however much effort is made. What is to happen will not stop, however much obstacle is made. What is going to happen is going to happen. What is not going to happen is not going to happen. Our making effort to try and experience something or trying to avoid experience something is futile, because what has to be undergone has to be undergone, and you cannot experience anything that you're not destined to experience. And in order to experience certain things, for example, supposing you've got a job and you've got you've got to do that job in order to earn money to support your family. If you are destined to do, if it's your destiny to support your family, your mind, speech, and body will be made to do whatever actions are necessary to do that job perfectly. The mistake we make is we identify ourselves. Oh, I am this person. Therefore I have to do this. I have responsibility. This is my wife, my husband, my children, my parents, my job, my boss, my the people under me. I have responsibility for all these things. The root problem is ego, this false identification. The aim of Bhagavan's teachings is to give up this false identification. So if we continue thinking, I have to do, that is only reinforcing ego, because it's reinforcing the wrong identification. Whatever the mind, speech, and body have to do, that is God's lookout. He will make them do. He will unfailingly make them do.
So relaxing, isn't it?
It is. But the trouble is, this ego doesn't let go easily. we hear these words, we think it's very nice. I'm speaking these words, but am I living up to this? No, I'm not. I'm trying to, of course, but failing again and again and again, because this is just the nature of ego. The ego will constantly be trying to grasp things other than itself. Ego is unwilling to let go. But this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, it's all about letting go. And how do we let go? Only by holding on to ourselves. If you hold on to what is real, what is unreal, will automatically drop off. You're no longer holding it. So the key is holding on to ourselves, being self-attentive.
Thank you.
Right.
So, Michael, Swami Sadhuvam says, throughout our life, we always have a choice, to attend to ourselves or to attend, our Jagannatha, as he calls it, world attention.
Yes.
So
that is every moment in our life, that choice is there.
Right. sorry, I'll just finish the question. And so there is, when that being the case, one of the devotees has posted a comment. It seems to me that we, awareness, are choiceless, because to choose it, there is only one, but basically saying that this life we live in is in fact choiceless. So how would you address that concern?
Well, ego is not choiceless. Ego is the result of a choice. We choose to cling to other things. We choose to cling to this person as I am this person, I am this body. That's our choice. Choicelessness and ego are incompatible. If you want to be choiceless, you need to choose to give up ego. So long as you rise as ego, you are making it's a result of our choice. We choose to rise as ego. We choose to say, I am this person, I am Michael, I am Kumar, I am whoever. It's our choice. So the pure awareness is choiceless because it has no options. It is one only without a second. So there's no choice for it. But so long as we rise as ego, we have a choice. We can attend to this or to this or to this or to ourselves. So to imagine that we are choiceless is false. So long as we are our real nature is choiceless, but as ego, we have risen as ego because we've chosen to rise as ego. We are standing as ego because we continue to choose to stand as ego. If we want to surrender ourselves, we must choose to surrender ourselves by clinging to our own reality, our own being. Is that a satisfactory answer? I don't know who asked the question.
Absolutely satisfactory. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So there's another question. Will the ignorance that I am this body die before the actual death of the body? How to kill the ego if ego is part of the body or jiva itself?
Ego is not part of the body. Ego is the root that gives rise to the appearance of body and world. It's only in the view of ego that the body seems to exist, that the world seems to exist. So ego cannot rise without projecting and taking a body to be I. But the root cause is ego, not the body. The body is the effect. Ego is the cause. Have I answered that question? I can't remember what the question was, but I answered part of it.
So I'll repeat the question. Will the ignorance that I am this body die before the actual death of the body? Then the next question is how to kill the ego if ego is part of the body or jiva itself? Right.
Well, ego is not part of the body. The body is a product. As soon as we rise as ego, we project a body and take it to be ourself. So ego is the root. Regarding, we don't have to wait for the death of the body in order to kill the ego, because the ego is just a false identification. I am this body. So we can, if we have sufficient love to know ourselves and to be ourselves as we actually are, we can annihilate ego here and now. We don't have to wait for the death of the body. If we wait for the death of the body will die, but ego won't die. That is, ego needs to give up its attachment, its identification with the body here and now, not to wait for death. We wait for death. Sometimes grace works in a way, but the actual annihilation of ego it's a very the death of the body is a very favorable opportunity because we are being forcibly separated from the body. So in the case of many of us, that annihilation of ego may occur at the time of death, not because of death of the body, but because we are being forcibly separated from the body. We have a choice there, either to cling to our own reality or to allow the mind to go outwards. If we allow the mind to go outwards, the body will die and the ego will remain and continue having one life after another, one dream after another, that is. But since we are being forcibly separated from ego, for someone who has been practicing this self-attentiveness throughout their life, that is a very favorable moment to that one final, to turn the final full 180 degrees. So that opportunity is, well, that opportunity is there at every moment in our life. It is possibly, the opportunity presents itself even more clearly at the moment of death, we can say. But we have to choose to take that opportunity. We have to be willing to surrender ourselves completely. That is, investigating ourselves entails letting go of everything else. In other words, investigating ourselves is the complete surrender of ourselves and of everything else. So until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely forever, to cease ever again rising as ego and knowing any multiplicity, until we are willing to surrender ourselves, we cannot succeed in this self-investigation. That is why Bhagavan says in that first sentence of the 13th paragraph, what is giving ourselves to God? It's clinging to self-attentiveness so firmly, but we thereby give no room to the rising of any other thought. In other words, we attend to ourselves so keenly, we don't allow our attention to drift away from ourselves towards anything else. That alone is truly surrendering ourselves to God.
So there is a question. What about the definition of ego being included in the 5 sheets?
Ego is that which identifies all the 5 sheaths as I. Ego is not part of the 5 sheaths. The 5 sheaths are what Bhagavan collectively refers to as body. Ego is that adjunct mixed awareness, I am this body. In other words, that which is aware of itself as I am this body, that is ego. The 5 sheaths are all jada. Ego is that which is aware of itself as I am this body consisting of 5 sheaths. So ego cannot rise or stand without projecting and grasping 5 sheaths as I, but it is always distinct from those 5 sheaths. The 5 sheaths are objects known by us. This body is very obviously an object known by us. The prana, the breathing and the heartbeat and the respiration, all these different physiological processes that make up the prana, these are objects known by us. The mind, in the sense of all the thoughts, perceptions, memories, feelings, emotions, and so on, these are all objects known by us. The workings of the intellect, it is known by us. It's an object known by us. The will, which the subtlest of the 5 sheaths, the Anandamaya kosha, which consists of vasanas, those vasanas are inclinations. They are known by us. They're objects known by us. So we are the subject. Everything else is the object. This is what is called drikdrisya viveka. The first thing we need to do is to clearly distinguish ourselves as the knower, independent from all the things that are known. So all these 5 sheaths are things known by us. We are the knower of them. That is, we as ego are the knower of them. So we need to investigate not anything that is known, but the knower. In other words, we need to turn our attention back towards ourselves. When we turn our attention back towards ourselves, ego subsides, in other words, the knower subsides, and what then remains is pure awareness, without any knower of anything other than itself.
Thank you, Michael. That answers the question.
Right.
I don't see any other questions. Let me see here. There may be one just came up. Thank you, Michael. That will conclude today's session.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank
you.
I'm all right.
Ramana.